version of me. I won't say anything about whether or not that's the better version. You can all decide. You can look at the recordings and decide which version was more on point. So what we're going to do is we're going to do our usual little icebreaker. I will share the screen in a second, and then we'll go through the standard housekeeping stuff. I just repeat it every time. Weirdly enough, there were quite a few new people on the last. Oh, hey, BB. There were quite a few new people on the last call, so it was actually really interesting to go through some of the housekeeping and the extra bits. And I'll also run through the previously on of some of the outcomes from the previous meetings, and then we'll hit the thing that we really want to talk about is accessibility. So I want to take us through what we're solving, what those horizons look like, what this discovery alpha thing that we're playing around with is, who we believe are the users and what we think the service is, and get lots of feedback from you as to whether I've missed little bits there, because you'll notice that it's not a well built out service yet, because we don't quite yet, there's so much we don't quite yet know, so we're just trying to sort that out. So, thank you, BB, for coming on screen. That really helps. So what I'll do is we'll do the icebreaker and then I'll share the screen. So we'll go around, we'll do name, pronoun, where you're from or what you do with this lovely bus data, and the question is your closest bus stop accessible? So, hey, I'm Dr. J, use they as a pronoun. You'll know me as the person who waves hands and draws cartoons and takes you through these public meetings. I'm nominally, I think I'm acting as the service owner of NaPTAN at the moment, as well as a subject matter expert for them on some of this. And is my closest bus stop accessible? I have the joy of living in central London, so all of the 5 or 6 closest bus stops next to me are accessible in that they've got curb carts, they've got raised curbs that a ramp can come down to, they've got tactile paving, they've got next bus notices and all of those things. So I am living the dream for accessibility. So I'm going to go up the list today. So Tim Rivet, I'm going to make you go next.
Hi, I'm Tim Rivet. I'm from Artig Inform and DFT subject matter expert, I guess, today. My closest bus stop, I think it depends on why you needed it to be accessible. It doesn't have tactile paving, but it's got a sort of raised curb. But the buses can't pull in properly because of parked cars. And the next nearest bus stops are on the middle of verges with grass all around and a 3-foot ditch full of water about 6 inches from the pole. So high risk, even for a fully able-bodied person.
I love the way that you've got parkour bus stops, almost. Thanks, Tim. Roger, you're the next one up.
Hi, I'm Roger Court. I'm from Kent County Council. I use he, him. And to my astonishment, because I've just looked it up on Google, my nearest bus stop is accessible. I'd walk past it on a regular basis, but it's one of those things, being able-bodied, I'd never taken much account of. It's got the works, basically. It's really good. There's a shelter and everything.
Wow.
Yeah, and I live in Kent. Yeah. This is a miracle.
I didn't know that Kent had left any shelters standing.
Yeah, it's odd here.
Iona, you're the next one up.
Hi, I'm Iona. I work for Strathclyde Partnership for Transport, which is essentially the transport body for Greater Glasgow. I use she, her pronouns. And yeah, my nearest bus stops are quite similar to Tim's, that there is high access curbs, but due to parking, the bus isn't always able to pull in, but there are shelters and real-time information, so that's probably as good as you're getting in Glasgow, a lot of it.
Thanks. Di, you're the next one up.
Hi, I'm Di Wright from Connect Tees Valley. I'm a she, her. I live in North Yorkshire in a little village, and my closest bus stops are custom ones, so there's absolutely nothing there at all.
So the most inaccessible of well, no, actually, I know some even more inaccessible bus stops, very much like Tim's, that I use as examples. And Bibi, welcome, and you're the next one up.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Bibi Barahi. I use the pronoun she, her, and I work for the Department for Transport as a policy advisor. And I'm quite lucky because I live on a small bus terminal. So there is a shelter, there is space for the buses to go through and everything. But I'm thinking my last place, it was a put your hand up and stop bus stop. So, and tons of cars everywhere in London. And, I don't know how people who don't know where the bus stops knows where to stand, let alone anybody else, or how to get there. With
Amazing.
all the parked cars.
So, Bibi, you would have lived nearby, and we haven't had a chance to properly catch up. You would have lived nearby one of the rare Halen rides in London, which is probably yeah.
Very
And those
handy,
are
if you know, very
handy if you know, and if you
but
don't,
if you
and
don't know, no.
Yeah. Di, I see you've got your hand up before we channel ourselves onwards.
Yeah, just to say that, yes, I've got nearest bus stops, but I don't actually have any buses.
Oh yes, yeah. We're not going to get onto the bus franchising and the differences, but that is one of the things that we are getting some data to start to look at. Di is preparing some data for everybody of how many bus stops are served, because when it comes to accessible, how many accessible bus stops there are and how served they are compared to inaccessible bus stops and uplift and things like this. And this is where Bibi might end up with a whole pile of weird stuff from Jay. Bibi is joining us as a product owner, so joining us in the kind of role that Hannah and Raj were playing. But I only get her for a couple of days a week, so I'm trying to ensure that I don't overwhelm her with 1,001 J ideas of what we can do with the data, and we have some really nice focused ones. So Bibi's well prepared for that. So what we're going to do is I'll run through some housekeeping, and then we'll do the previously on, just to make sure everybody's on the same page with some of these decisions that were made kind of jointly across these things. I'm now also looking at better ways of publishing those decisions and those ideas, because we've coalesced, we've kind of come together, and they're above the schema, and they're ways that we're corralling the 147 or so different local authorities and everyone who puts stuff into NaPTAN into doing things as similarly as possible, without saying you all have to do it this way. It's here's the best interpretations. And then we'll hit on accessibility, and we've got the feedback page. We've got a YouTube channel. Everything we do is published up there. I will get these two meetings, because they're both going to be really easy to cut and edit. They don't need a lot of editing at all. I'm just going to throw them straight up. So they'll probably be up there by early next week. You can follow us on Eventbrite. I try to publish the meetings at least a month early. I'm just running a bit behind on my admin because I've been doing tons of meetings, and we've also got to sign up for our newsletter. I've also just received notice that I now have to include an unsubscribe link. So if you're waiting on admin stuff, it might take a little bit longer, because I've got to get the team to help me figure out how to build an unsubscribe link. The next meeting, so this is the January meeting. I know it's February, just cope with my misunderstanding of the concept of time. It's going to be on data quality. So what I want to do is look at the stuff that I've been able to just probe around and find out around consistency, completeness, and accuracy of data, and just kind of having a look at where we might want to focus. What are the areas that would move the needles, and what does moving the needle mean and look like for us around data quality? And then in March, I have had to bring it slightly forward, because I discovered there was this thing called Easter at the end of March, start of April, which messed up the dates that I'd already put in. So we're just going to have a wrap up of the last 3 months. This is just after we will have done our GDS Alpha assessment. So we're going to have a lot of stuff to talk about. And then April, May and June, I've put some dates in. Not quite sure what we're going to talk about. We'll figure it out, and we'll work out between myself and BB and the rest of the team what are the things that we need to cover there. Any questions? Any worries about the dates? I tried to do my best with the dates, not to hit too many things where people are likely to be away. We might shuffle the June and the July and August meetings a little bit so that we don't hit so much everyone's August breaks, because we know that they're very lightly attended meetings. So we might have a look at maybe taking a break in August. We'll see what we need to talk about and what's going on. So previously on NaPTAN, managed removal. We now have only over 2,500 stops removed from NaPTAN in a controlled process. So local authorities have been able to come to us and put stops in to this process, mark them as removed. They're removed from the system. It's very controlled. We know exactly what stops have been removed, when and by who. And that is working really well. We're just making a few little tweaks to the front end and the error messaging for it, just to make it a tiny bit smoother. But everyone's response so far has been, this was easy, this is almost trivial. The hardest part is actually getting the list of stops together. The easy part should be putting it through this process. So what we're going to do is we now want more local authorities to come onto the private beta. We've got TfL and TF Transport for Greater Manchester are next up, and then we've got some spare capacity in this quarter and in this half of the year. So get in touch. Di, I'm aware of the trapeze problem. We're working with trapeze. They've been given access to an API that will soon be live so that they can go and see what stops have been removed and update their systems. And we believe that that's going to help them come up with a solution within trapeze so that you can remove stops from our system and not have them show in your NaPTAN export. So that's what we're working towards with them, and we'll keep you updated as to where things are. So I know that affects quite a lot of I'm going to say the north, remembering my understanding of geography. A lot of the north are on trapeze, so there's quite a few of you who are impacted. Iona, it might be you as well, is it? Are you also on trapeze, or are you on a homebrew?
Yeah, we're on trapeze. One of our systems are on trapeze, and there's a bit of our database, which is all the infrastructure stuff, is moving to a new database, but that should still be linked to trapeze for the foreseeable just now, anyway.
Yeah. So you and I might need to have a quick meeting and a catch up with the tech team and just make sure once trapeze is done that there's all the links are done for you before we bring you on board. One of the reasons we're being very controlled about how we're bringing people on to managed removal is that managed removal is a one-way street. If you start on it, there's no backing out, which is why we're being very slow and very careful at the moment of who we bring on, just to make sure that any technical issues we can solve, and we've got the resources free to solve them. As we get a bit further down, I think we will have encountered all the technical issues, and hopefully then it will just be much, much easier to have people come on board. But we're still going to have to onboard one by one. There's no way around that, unfortunately. I did think of other ways, and it just didn't work because of the one-way system. Street versus schema. This is going to be an ongoing discussion around how we interpret pieces from the schema to match the street. For example, BB's hail and rides are actually marked hail and rides. There'll be things on the flagpoles, and those technically don't really exist. And it's kind of one of those little weird pieces that we're just trying to sort out. So we're going to have, I think this will come up a lot in the quality discussions about how we make what we put into the schema match the street and much better so that people can really understand what's going on. Precisely and accurately is about locations. Everyone's doing easting, northings amazingly. 1 metre by 1 metre is fantastic. We're also now, we agreed that we would measure the best point is where somebody needs to stand, because that is also going to help us a lot with the accessibility. That is usually besides the flag. The times to think about this is where it's not besides the flag. don't measure from the flag, measure from where the person needs to stand. This should stop a couple of the oddities in London as well, such as a tail stop, where the flag is at the back of the bus, not the front of the bus. And having stood there and done some ethnographic research while I waited for a bus, it leads to a lot of confusion between not only drivers but passengers as to where they need to stand at those stops, because they're rare and they're a bit weird, and doing something like that just makes it a lot clearer for people. Ordnance survey have a conversion tool. We suggest this is the only method used. We've now got a little bit of work that we're able to do where we can look at a local authority, we can look at what the ordnance survey conversion of your Eastings Northings is and what the tool that you're using is doing and how closely they match. So there's a little bit of data quality work we're going to be doing to kind of pull that out and understand where some things are wrong. But we also know that for some of you, you're using Null Island, either 00 on Eastings Northings or 00 on Lat Long, to put your remove stops out of the way. Now we've got managed removal, those should be going, so we should have things that are super, super clear and easy. Coaches, we now know what a coach is. That was an interesting couple of days discussion. There are some distance limits on coach routes. One of the things is we've removed the coach references from NaPTAN. So the 900 coach stops hadn't been updated for quite a few years. I'm going to say more than 8, less than 15 number of years. And obviously stuff had changed in that time. So we've just withdrawn them. We've still got access to them if anyone needs them, but we're saying they're withdrawn, and you no longer need to put the coach references when you're putting in a stop either. So these are little things that you can go do. If you're in there, do it. If you're not in there, don't take it on as a new job or anything. We need to come up with a proper roadmap. Our roadmap just changed in December. The roadmap changed completely, taking on accessibility. So that's meant that I'm now just working on what the roadmap might look like, what we're going to propose for the next financial year, and working with BB and Catherine and a couple of other people in DFT to figure out what we think we can do, what we can get funding for, and how that would all work. We're still analysing the different ways you use ACCO and NaPTAN codes. I went through and just said there's more than 150 ways that these are created. I know that's more than the number of actual NaPTAN codes, because as people have changed and as local authorities have changed personnel or changed technologies, they've actually changed how they're doing their NaPTAN codes and their ACCO codes. So one of the things that I did for a Scottish local authority, they couldn't figure out how to make their NaPTAN codes work, so I built them a little spreadsheet. So if you need something like that, feel free to come to me. I've got enough analysis from there. I can build you a little spreadsheet that will generate your NaPTAN codes or your ACCO codes, whichever way around you need them, so that you can stay kind of within the same realms as the previous ones have done, because it's not easy and it's not obvious. And data retention. So we built a data retention policy. We told you it would have no impact to you. It hasn't. Oh, well, it's had one positive impact. We've saved 97% on our monthly storage costs. So we've reduced them by 97%. By putting this in place. We also now will store, we've got a NaPTAN data future-proofed to store for 100 years. So in 2108, the 2008 NaPTAN will be deleted. So there is this very, very clear, here is the old NaPTAN information, this is when it will be deleted, this is how long we're storing it for, and we're storing it in a way that doesn't cost DFT or anyone a large amount of money or CO2 or anything like that. So we're just working that through. The other thing is, because we stored all of the information that you give us, we were then able to locate the last good version of a local authority. I wasn't going to call out Swansea, but everyone knows that it's Swansea, when they had a problem, because they had an upgrade that removed all bar 65 of their stops. And when it was uploaded, suddenly all the stops disappeared. The moment we found out, we contacted Tansy and Transport for Wales, and they went, oh, gosh, we need to sort this out. and we can just upload the last good one. We just went back through and found the last good one, which was from November, and just re-uploaded that very, very quickly as a stopgap while they figured out why they had the problems. And that took us about 10 minutes from the time that we actually knew. The 30 minutes was very much the quick emails to go, are you okay with us doing this, or do you have something that you're about to do? So we didn't want to trip over each other. So that's a good thing of now having data retention, and we can talk about that. And if you do have a problem, if something goes completely wrong, you can get hold of us via the main mailbox. From when we pick it up, it'll take us about half an hour to fix it. Relying on us to pick it up, that's a separate thing, but it's office hours and things like that. So, is there any questions on that before I barrel on ahead into accessibility? Excellent. So, this is a draft service design, so none of this is set in stone. This is all for your feedback, trying to make sure that I'm thinking of the right things and I've got the right ideas and I haven't missed anything massive. Before we run on, Alison, would you mind, I'm just going to run back to the start. Would you like to do as a quick, we've all done an icebreaker, and I know it's horrible to come in and have to do your intro and your icebreaker and not hear anyone else's, but we're effectively just doing name, pronoun, where you're from, and is your closest bus stop an accessible bus stop?
Hello. Sorry I joined late. Yes, and I was sort of one of those that I'm having to do some other stuff as well, but I am listening. I'm very interested. Just as an aside, before I get to that, Roger Court, I see, is on the call, and he's from Kent, and he does all our NaPTAN for us. So I'm here as a sort of floating party, but interested. But actually, we don't do the nitty gritty currently. Shall we just say? Like keep Roger on his toes. I'm Alison Horton. I'm from Surrey County Council. She, her, and my nearest accessible bus stop is accessible, actually, and it's got real time as well, which went wrong because of we have an issue with TFL feeds. So I'm very interested in that stop, and I'm the bane of everyone's life about it. And it's a very busy stop. It's outside Lidl. It's in Leatherhead. That's how sad I am. And if you want the real time, I can even tell you the ID of our real time display on it, because I am so sad.
That is not sad. Welcome to the people who are that upset, and also I have something that I'll send you for feedback that I've done. I've called it Beryl on the Ghost Buses, around some of the problems with the real-time displays, and just see if it makes sense and reflects your experience of it.
If it helps, Dr. J, I am the contract manager for a real-time system anyway. I'm also doing the day-to-day stuff because we haven't got any other resources. So, and I started doing the day-to-day stuff, and I just sort of worked my way up. So, yes. I got accused of standing looking at a bus stop. That's what people do, isn't it? I thought that's most normal people did, but
my team have started worrying about me, because everywhere I go, A, I get them to take photos of bus stops for me, and B, I can also talk about bus stops that I have driven past in great detail, and then they'll find them on the maps and everything, and just be like, how did you drive past this at 50 miles an hour and know this much information about a bus stop? And I'm like, I'm looking out for all the telltale signs.
You're now part of our world.
Oh yes. It's been 3 years. I'm Jay. I'm addicted to buses and bus data. Cool. Thank you, Alison. That's really great, and hopefully this accessibility stuff will also tie in as well. So we want to talk about accessibility data, and now I've called it in NaPTAN. We're using in NaPTAN to describe all of the data that's put out by the NaPTAN team, because it's not just the singular data set or the data within it, it's also the app, the MPTG, all of those other bits and pieces. So how does this all fit? So the service goal is to ensure NaPTAN holds accessibility data. Everyone's been asking for that since heavens only knows when. And we want to have a look at how we can do it. And the NaPTAN goals is to have NaPTAN able to meet policy goals on accessibility across public transport. It sounds a little bit more abstracted than the service goal, but it is very much, if you're going to give us data, we want to figure it out. So what's in scope on this? And this is the scope for the service that I'm building. I'll get on to more scopy things in a bit. So what accessibility data do we already have for stops? What have we got out there? What do we have? What street furniture data do we have for stops? Can we do things? What information can we infer without an audit? So can we infer stuff from the street data that allows us to fill in gaps on the accessibility data or refresh accessibility data? Is this something that we could possibly do? And what types of accessibility can we get data for? Can we only get data for people who are in wheelchairs and need step-free access? Or can we get information about tactile paving, about accommodations for blind and deaf people? What can we get from the data that we can get to infer these? Out of scope, accessibility information schema and audit, because we don't know what that would look like yet, and we're just keeping it out of scope. And any legislation for accessibility information. We don't want to, the last thing I want is this to be legislated in and there be nowhere for you to give us that information, or the way that we would get the information from you would cause a lot of extra work. We know ain't nobody going to be able to do that at the moment. There's a quick dictionary for everybody who's new to NaPTAN and ATCO codes and how they all work and what's a local authority. Just kind of spout them out. Probably need to do a little bit more work with this one because this is copied from the managed removal piece, and I'm just going to bring that across and spell that out a little bit more. So the next piece, trying to remember where I am on this, need more coffee. So let's get into what problem we are solving. What's the big idea that we're looking at and what are we solving? So you'll recognise those who have been on these before. This is Beryl. Beryl lives in Bristol. Beryl wants to see her friend Beverly. Beverly lives in Birmingham. We also have a new character called Brenda. Brenda is in a wheelchair. Brenda lives in Bristol. Brenda wants to see her friend Beverly. Beverly lives in Birmingham. Ideally, Beryl and Brenda would travel together. But I'm not even attempting that yet. We're just trying to get them to travel. So the current situation is Beryl can use a travel planner to do a multi-operator, so more than one operator of the same type of transport, multimodal, more than one type of transport, rail and buses, and multi-local authorities, so she can cross local authority boundaries. And by using a travel planner, she can plan her journey in one place and she has all the information to have agency and autonomy over her travel plans. That's kind of what NaPTAN provides, and I'll go into that in a moment. Brenda, trying to do the same thing currently with a travel planner, she cannot plan her journey in one place. She needs to check with every operator, mode, and local authority to find accessibility information, detailed, that what you need to know to plan. She cannot gather all of the information she needs to have agency and autonomy over her travel plans. So Brenda decides not to use public transport to make the journey to see Beverly. And there are two outcomes. Both are bad. I've coloured them red and black just because, and it's not saying which one's worse even. So in the first one, Brenda drives or is driven in a private vehicle. And the second one, Brenda decides not to travel to see Beverly. So that increases her social and economic isolation, which is one of the things that DFT and a lot of the previous work on accessibility within public transport has recognised, that those two are both not desirable outcomes, but the black outcome is probably the even worse one, of increasing that social isolation and increasing that isolation and economic isolation. So why is this happening? And this is about 99% true. I had to tweak some dates slightly, Tim, just because it made it easier to say early 2000s than sometime in the late 90s. So Beryl's transport
I'll not hold you to the detail.
Thank you. Because it's one of those ones of, if you say early 2000s, people can do the dates really easily. Whereas the moment you say the 90s, people suddenly think it's like only 10 years ago. I don't know why. It's one of those weird things of our brains are not working time. I blame lockdown. I also blame nostalgia. So Beryl's transport was linked up in the early 2000s when NaPTAN was created. NaPTAN allowed data that had been in silos, so there was a lot of siloing prior to NaPTAN around bus stops and bus journeys. It allowed those to be joined up by providing a what is where for all public transport. So it just says what infrastructure and where it is, so then people can schedule and line it up. NaPTAN stops are described in a consistent consistent-ish format, with each having a unique identifier. So the unique identifier is really great. The consistent-ish format is me being a bit data quality focused. So Brenda trying to do the same thing, she's not able to see the accessibility information in the travel planner, or if it is, it will be siloed and patchy. It will be available for one local authority or one mode, but not for the rest. The data Brenda needs is in a silo for each operator, mode, and local authority. For example, we know TfL has some pretty good data. It's shared in some ways, but not in others. It's shared in ways that some other travel planners might be able to pick it up and some might not, because it's not in an open, consistent format. Brenda needs to visit each operator, mode, and local authority to see that accessibility information. The other thing is sometimes the information Brenda needs is not consistent. It's not described consistently at the moment. Step free may not mean step free, or level and step free are slightly different, or what is actually available. And sometimes the information Brenda needs may not be accessible to the public. So a local authority or an operator may hold it and may want to publish it, but there's nowhere to publish it. It's just held off in a data set. For example, the Olympic data set was published to data.gov, and I'll get onto the Olympic data set in a moment, but no one could access it, no one could use it. Or if it was used very patchily. So the outcome we want to create seems incredibly simple. Brenda can use a travel planner to plan her journey. She'll be able to view the accessibility information within the travel planner, and the information she views is consistent between modes, operators, and local authorities. It sounds, when you spell it out like that, it sounds so simple. And yet I know this is like multi-years worth of work in those three stickies. I am not blind to this. I've worked on NaPTAN long enough now to know that what seems so absolutely simple is actually going to take quite a bit of work. So what is it? What are we doing? So we're doing something. There's been a lot of discoveries. Let's be honest. There's been a lot of discoveries on accessibility, a lot of discovery work that's been done. But what we wanted to do was look at it from a much narrower angle. So we're doing a much more focused discovery around this idea and this proposal. So we have three hypotheses that we have three of these sentences that are hypothesis that we are going through. I can never pronounce the plural of hypothesis. So our first hypothesis is the data exists for most of Great Britain, England, Scotland, and Wales, and it is not published for passengers, or it is published in silos. So that's the first bit that we're doing, that we're going out, we're talking to everybody and getting a real understanding of what the data landscape is. So for example, Iona, I know that you have a database available, or a data set available of all of your street furniture, but that is not linked up to your trapeze. And one of our hypotheses is if we provided some way for you to do an export of that data somehow and give it to us, we would then be able to do some work to link it up and to give some kind of accessibility information. Does that make quick sense? I know that I'm jumping ever so slightly here.
Yeah, we have certain accessibility things on our current system, like high access curbs should be logged, but not necessarily everything else. But as I said, we're moving to a new database, so that's something I'll bring up that we should be making sure we're including.
And what I'd like to do, Iona, is get you involved in our discovery. I'll pass your details on to our user research team if you're fine with that, and we'll have some talk to you about what you've got. So that's the first hypothesis. The second hypothesis is if we provide the access information to a NaPTAN data consumer, a travel planner, they will be able to publish it to passengers. So we're not assuming that what we can do will make it to passengers. We're saying if we give it to a travel planner, like Travel Line, or TfL, they can take that data and publish it upwards. We want to provide it in a format that's going to be good for them. And the third one is that the access information published will be understood by passengers, giving them the agency and autonomy to make travel decisions. So it needs to look at the different ways that passengers would want to consume this data, which will drive back as to how we make this data, how we infer this data, and how we put it together. So we've got a discovery and an alpha that are happening at the same time. This is unusual. GDS are just coping with it. Our GDS assessors are actually really, really good, and we've talked them through how we're doing this, so they're kind of uncovering what we're doing, understanding what we're doing. So in the discovery piece, we're uncovering the accessibility information in the data system. So we're trying to understand what's sitting in Kent, what's sitting up in Glasgow, what's sitting in London, what people have and what they can get their hands on. We know that there are some local authorities that literally could not get their hands on their street furniture data. It's held by a third party because of contractual reasons. And it's like, that's completely fine. Understanding that is what we need to do. We don't want to turn around and say, you have to give us this data. We understand what you could get for us. So it's a little bit more about trying to get our heads into the reality of each local authority and then grouping them in different ways and going, okay, for these ones we can do this, for these ones we can get this data, and how do we handle that? Uncover what data consumers expect of accessibility information. So we're working with travel planners, we're working with Trainline, we're also working with TfL or Travelline, TfL, and we're going to work with a couple more if they'll come back and have a chat with us. We want to show them some example of how the data might work, what the feed might look like, what we could expect to give them, and then talk them through about how they might consume it. Do they want to do a query based on stops and do lots of live little short API calls, or do they want to grab an entire data set and meld it into their data set? What's going to work best for them, and what technologies do we need to provide for that? And then the last one is talking off with passengers with access needs about how they want to consume information. We're making a whole pile of assumptions of saying wheelchair will mean that everyone in a wheelchair will have similar needs. We know that that's not entirely true. In very much like all of NaPTAN, if nothing is ever simple, we know that every local authority has its own way of doing things. We know that every person who has accessibility needs has a varying need of different accommodations. There are some people who I know who use a wheelchair who can basically bounce off curbs. So as long as a curb is not too high, they can bounce off and trundle along and have no problems. There are other people who are in a wheelchair where if the ramp is 12 degrees, not 10 degrees, their chair is going to struggle to get up it. And if we just use wheelchair, are we describing things well enough? How do we break things down? How do we give people that information? And that's the lot of getting in and working with people. So we're looking at also a lot of the discovery questions have been about people's travel experience. What we want to look at is almost that first part around planning travel. What do you need to make your travel plans feel good? What do you need to know at this point, and how can we get that information? What's ways of surfacing it? Is it screeds of text or is it 2 or 3 icons? How does all of this fit together? So that's the discovery part, and we've got 2 user researchers working on that along with the rest of the team. And then we've got an alpha part. Now, an alpha is a technical proof of concept. So what we're doing is we're building some pieces of code that are good enough to make this happen, but not good enough to go into production. So they're good enough to test out these ideas, but we can't turn this on instantly. We're going to have to go back and retool this a lot to make sure that it's solid and stable, etc. Because we want to keep NaPTAN the stable thing that it has been. So we want to prove with a limited data set that data can be ingested and held. So this means we can take data in and all the varieties of ways that people can give it to us, and we can hold it in a sensible way. That's actually quite a decent technical challenge, to take in all kinds of different types of data. We want to prove with a limited data set that that data can be linked to NaPTAN stop information. We want to have a look at, okay, so we've got this messy pool of accessibility data. Can we link it up to NaPTAN so that you can find out, does it link easily? Does it not link easily? How does that work? And then we want to prove with a limited data set that information can be exported to a data consumer. So how do we get this information? How do we make it understandable and give it to somebody so that they can pick it up. Does it need to be this type of API, that type of API? There's at least 4 of them now that the team tried to tell me about. And I don't quite get all of the details. I know one's a query one, and one is kind of like an RSS feed, and then one is like, give me the entirety of the data set type one. We've also set ourselves 3 really hard constraints. And the team have come back asking me to modify these constraints, and I told them no. And they then had to go back and think again about how they tackled some of these challenges. So one of our constraints is we cannot ask a local authority to transform data. So whatever a local authority can get the data as, we take it in. We're not going to ask any local authority to put it into a schema, to take it from XML to CSV or CSV to XML or something. What you can get from your system is what we take in. So that is trying to remove a lot of the work from local authorities and put it into our central technology. Makes it a harder challenge. That may be a constraint that we have to throw away, but let's work with that in the first place. Our second constraint is the data must exist in local authorities. We cannot ask somebody to go out and do an audit. So we want to figure out what we can do with what is there. We don't want to turn around and say, oh, the only way we can do accessibility is to have everyone go out and audit every single bus stop, because we don't believe that that's necessary to get us enough data to start this off. That may be something that happens in the future, but it's not what needs to happen right now. We can build something that is enough to iterate on from the data that already exists. And the third one, which Tim will be pleased about, no changes can be made to the NaPTAN schema, because even while there's a 2.5 schema that tries to bring in some accessibility, nobody is able to use that within their systems at the moment. 85% of the local authorities are still on 2.1 schema, which was valid in 2005. I think it was pushed out. A lot of people just haven't had the money or the chance or the need to update. So we want to just say there are no changes to the NaPTAN schema. We don't change anything. We figure out how to make this work. So the technical team are like, well, you're certainly setting some challenges for the next 12 weeks. So the limited data sets that we're playing with are we've called it the Olympic audit. It was originally done in 2010, updated in 2016, and with a few stops in 2017. And we're calling it the Olympic audit, even though it was never actually an audit. It covers about 40% of stops. It's got information on 172,000 stops. Accessibility within this is just listed as wheelchair, true, false. And then there's another one called assistance, true, false. And that's literally, and there's sometimes based around assistance, but that's literally all that it's got. At bus stop level, it is literally accessibility, true, false. Or wheelchair, true, false. So we're now kind of looking at what they meant by wheelchair. Is this enough? How does this work? There's 11 local authorities that were not covered in this audit at all for insert reasons here. I don't know them. One of the things that we're kind of looking at is, could we extend this audit programmatically using MPTG data to make some sensible assumptions? That is something that we're going to play around with once we've got some of this working. Also, it includes all the 900 stops which have been withdrawn from NaPTAN. So it's got all the information on the coach stops at the time, all the national coach stops that nobody has been using for ages. So we're just going to pull those out of the data. They're in the data set. They'll never be used. We also have TfL are giving us access to the information that they're using within their travel planner. It's kind of part of one of their open data sets, but it's a little bit tricky to get to. They also have some interchange information within the stations. And for those who are super geeky, there is a really interesting interchange at Oxford Circus between the Victoria and the Bakerloo lines, which is a level interchange. But Oxford Circus does not have step-free to the surface access. So it's one of those ones that all the disabled people know this little trick. It's a really good hack for getting around central London. And it's one of those ones, and it's knowing the best interchanges to take and the ones that are shortest, the ones that actually have those little step-free moments. So it's how to get to Waterloo from King's Cross step free actually means knowing about this Victoria Line, Bakerloo Line interchange. And it's one of those little weird things that the geeks know. I'm not a geek on transport, honest. And then one of the things, because Northamptonshire is being split into two, and Northamptonshire have just had to do a full-on physical audit of all of their stops, which is really handy because they've had to go out to understand what they've got and what needs fixing, etc. So they actually have a really, really complete physical audit, stop level street infrastructure data set, which they have given to us, which doesn't link into NaPTAN yet because I haven't created their ACCO codes. It links into the old version of Northamptonshire, not the new split version.
How many stops was that, Jay?
Oh,
that they went and did physical visits to?
It's all of them, and it's over 1,500 and less than 5,000. I will have to go and double check, but I think it's within that
just
number.
out of interest to see. I mean, obviously it's quite hard to see with scale and like other council areas, especially down south, what it is compared to us. It's just out of interest.
Oh yeah, and I'm also aware that a lot of Scottish local authorities have less than 1,000 stops. I know one of them only has 700 and something stops in it. So yeah, I can get you the exact number when I do the split, and that's one of the things that's coming up as Northamptonshire's being split into two ACCO codes. On top of that, we've got some other data sets that we might be also include. So there's the Great British Rail Transition Team, or National Rail, whatever it's called currently. They have a rail platform data set, which is platform level accessibility audit that is incredibly detailed. So but there is a problem with NaPTAN in that we don't do platforms at rail stations currently because we've got all the rail stations and a few more that we don't need. But we've only got 3 platforms. So we've got a little data quality fix bit of work that needs to get lined up and go on to put all the platforms in, starting with the multi-platform stations and then working the big stations like Clapham Junction and places like that, and then working down to the tiny 1 or 2 platform stations. And then that means that we could take in this platform data. So we might be playing around a little bit with how we can take this data, and we can maybe show accessibility at a station level, not at a platform level, because there are some platforms that are not accessible at some stations and other platforms are, and knowing that information is vital so that you don't end up trapped on an inaccessible platform or trying to get to an inaccessible platform. So that's one of the things. And then also Somerset were going to give us a physical audit information. They've just had a quick change of personnel and a few bits and pieces. We're trying to get our hands on the right person there for a couple of hours just to get that information. One of the conversations last year, they mentioned that they cut down a hedge and found a stop that had been missing for 8 years. So they've gone through and they've done some really good physical audit, street infrastructure information that we can use. We're just wanting to chat to them. Does this all make sense before I barrel on into horizons and users? Oh, one last thing. We've done a little proposed alpha journey. This is what, when we've got the alpha working, we can start to tie up this nice little 4-step journey. Multimodal, doesn't quite cost LA boundaries, but I just needed one that I could get to walk through and be home within half a day. So we can go from Victoria Station. Now I've said Victoria Station. The great thing of Victoria is it's a bus, train, underground and coach station. So there are 4 different modes that you could arrive at, which gives us a lot of information around how we talk about accessibility in those 4 places. Then travel from there to Westminster Pier, which is either a short tube journey or a short bus ride on particular buses, and then from Westminster Station to Westminster Pier is a 2-minute walk. Westminster Pier, then hopping on a boat, one of the river boats that would take you to Greenwich Pier, and Greenwich Pier does actually connect up to the land. As for some reason, Google has the pier sitting in the middle of the buoys. So that journey is also it's impacted slightly by the tide. So here's a weird thing. The ramps, because I needed bringing in as many complications as possible, some of the piers are less accessible at low tide because the ramp is steeper. So it's kind of being able to think about that in how we describe the accessibility of this pier, and doing this journey maybe once or twice because, hey, it's a nice journey up and down the river. But also it's one of the ones that kind of covers that weird, some things are accessible at different times of day, which also covers bus stops which are not in the centre of London, which don't have street lights near them. How do we describe the accessibility for a blind person or a partially sighted person or anybody when there's a bus stop in the middle of the countryside or in the middle of a village, but there's no street lighting nearby? How do you then cross the road to safety and things like this? And then finally, from Greenwich Pier, we catch a bus up to Greenwich Observatory, have a nice afternoon tea up there or a picnic. But it's kind of one of those things of that there's a little bit of wayfinding from Greenwich Pier to the next bus stop, and then from the next bus stop up. The bus stops should be accessible because they're Central London TfL bus stops. It's just doing some of those of, are they described as accessible? Are they actually as accessible as they mean to be, and things like that. And we can walk through this journey. We can walk through this journey with some people who have access needs and actually really get to understand the things that would make this journey more difficult for them. But this is kind of what we're throwing into the mix. So, horizons. This is a very messy horizons picture, because normally you have that very clear, here is the mountain, here are the foothills, here is where we are. We don't quite have that for this at the moment, because we don't quite know what we're going to be aiming for in the horizon. There's this is a view from Corfu, from a really lovely restaurant that I went to up in the hills, and there are three hills. This one here is the most distant, and is actually the kind of the tallest in reality, just not in the view that we're there. And it's kind of like, so which of those three should we be aiming for on those horizons? Are we aiming for the right one? When we're thinking of the foothills, that's really going to depend on which horizon we're aiming for. And you can see that there's partial bits of road and pathway that you can see through the garden. And our horizon one is really messy, really lots of stuff in the way. It's not very clear even how we're going to get through this first horizon. So I just kind of wanted to talk about, we've put some ideas down as to what these are and what these horizons might be, and just to get some feedback so we can firm this up a bit. So the garden level is a data consumer could ingest accessibility via our API. So a data consumer could ingest accessibility via an API that links to NaPTAN data. So we're doing some really, really simple little pieces here. And a data consumer would be able to ingest accessibility information for a limited number of stops or ACCO codes via an API. So they could actually say, for London, I can get some information, but I can't get it for Chesham. I can't get it for Kent. Or Kent, I've got some partial information, but it's only for the more built-up areas of Kent that we've got some really good information of what this looks like. And the information surfaced is minimal. It might change without notice, and it might change. It may not quite be consistent for a mode or local authority, but it's going to be consistent within a mode and within a local authority. And the information surfaced might not be, eventually we'll get it consistent between modes and between local authorities. So we're just kind of going, look, this is just the alpha. We're going to do our best to try to surface some of this. When we hit the private beta, this is where it becomes actually usable for an actual user. So hence Brenda has appeared. Brenda can plan a limited journey on her travel planner. She'll be able to view accessibility information in the travel planner for a limited number of stops or ACCO codes. So she's actually able to see that. She's able to see, hey, I can actually see what's going on in Bristol, but I might not be able to see it in Birmingham, or vice versa. the information. And again, it's minimal, it's consistent within a mode or a local authority, and eventually it'll be consistent between them. And then finally, the mountain that we're aiming for is the live. As Brenda can use can plan a journey in a travel planner. She's able to view the accessibility in a travel planner, and it's consistent between modes, operators, and local authorities. One of the things that I haven't put there is we don't need to cover everything, or we would give Brenda a review of what's covered and what's not covered when she looks at it. So it might be that you could, to use Midlothian as an example, because they haven't given us data since 2018, we know that we could send somebody, if Brenda wants to travel to Midlothian, we could say the Midlothian data might not be fully accurate. It'll come up grey or have some kind of indicator that lets her know this is a best guess. This is not something that we are basing on data. This is all basing on hardcore data. Whereas she might know if she's leaving in Kent from outside the Lidl by where Alison was talking about, she'll know that there is an accessible bus stop that her bus can arrive at and she will be able to get on. So it's kind of, how do we show that confidence in the data when we've got an entire country's worth of data to play with? So interesting as to how we'll get there. And this is why the horizons are a little bit fuzzy. Does this make sense to everybody as to how we're talking about this and how we're breaking it down? Are there any red flags for anyone of like, oh, you're trying too much, or well, you're not aiming very high here at all?
I think it's breaking it down into these steps is quite sensible given where we are.
Thank you, Tim. Alison.
I agree, Dr. J, that I think this is an ambition for us. We have got very poor accessibility data for our stops and are aware of it. Just lack of resource and doing audit, and everything's constantly changing, and developments come in and put in stops that we're assuming are accessible, but nobody's actually audited those. So, or if they have, it's because of the development, not because of our audit. So I think this is a great ambition, certainly somewhere we want to go. How we get there, but we shouldn't limit ourselves by that.
Thank you. Di.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, that should be the aspiration, is Horizon 3. However, practically, I can't see we're ever getting there.
I like to think that, and this is a little bit of queer theory, and I'm sorry to everyone, but there's this thing in queer theory called the unrealizable utopia. So there's a whole thing that we're constantly reaching towards something that is an unattainable, unrealizable utopia. But by reaching towards it, we progress how we're going, and we start to make moves towards it, but we recognize we may never get there. That is some of what's driving this, I think, and I agree, Di. It's a really great aspiration. We might not get there, but it's by trying to reach there.
Everything is in place. Everything works perfectly. Everything's in place. Who is it? Brenda gets on the bus and gets to her destination, and that bus stop is closed off because the road's been dug up, and she's put a temporary stop a bit further down.
Yeah,
it can fail. It can be as wonderful and singing and dancing as you like, but it can fail at that point.
And this is where having it in NaPTAN and then allows us to link it into some of the live stuff that comes through, like the disruption feeds and things like that. There's also a really interesting feed called Up Down London, which is which of the lifts in London are currently in and out of service. And it's like, if we can get this information into travel planners, because often you're using the journey planner live to remind you of when to hop off buses and things like that. If it's able to indicate, look, we're really sorry, you're going to have to reroute your journey because of emergency roadworks, because a water main's broken, you're going to end up at this stop, which is mostly accessible, but it's a 10-minute journey from your original destination. We recommend that you do this, or you do this, or here are your options. That's again part of that dream of those mountains, is being able to take the disruption information from BODs and from other places and circulate it within this, because that is something, Di, that comes up a lot when we're in a lot of the research that's been published around accessible travel. Is I'm traveling and the situation changes and I don't know I can't replan because the planning is so difficult. So if the planning becomes simpler, if we can have the systems able to do the planning when there is a disruption, you can sort it out. I get impacted by this as well. Some of you have met me and know that I walk with a stick. York Station, train station, I love it, been through it a number of times, one of the most beautiful train stations. When they move my train from the platform that I'm on to one that is literally on the other side, and I think there's 7 platforms, I am going to be much slower than everyone else to get from where we are to the train. And fortunately, on the day that this happened, I was with a whole pile of, I think they were a rugby team or something, or had been to see the rugby. So they were really lovely guys who just basically turned and said, right, because when this happened, they could see the panic on my face. And they said, is there a problem? I said, I've got to go and catch the lifts, and the lifts here are really slow. And they're like, that's fine. We'll let the guards know because you're in the same carriage as us because we're waiting by our carriage stops. We'll let the guards know and make sure that they hold the train for you. And I just went and had to wait for the very slow lifts to get me into the right place and walk through the tunnel rather than being able to do the quick jump over the bridge. And it's things like that that really catch disabled passengers out. And it sounds so simple but it's just changed platforms. And it's like, Elephant and Castle also, if there's a change of platform, I know I can't do the change in time because it's 3 flights of stairs. So I have to barrel down 3 flights of stairs, run across and up 3 flights of stairs to change platforms at Elephant and Castle. And there's just no physical way that I can do that. So occasionally I've just gone, I'm going to be late. My train's moved platforms. It's as simple as that. And that's being able to tell somebody live what their options are is just going to help. Yay, way too much about traveling as a disabled passenger. So what I've done, and you're all going to be really used to this, seeing the different users. So what we've done is we've taken all of the local authority users and broken them into 4 broad groups. And this is based on how you do your systems, how you interact, because knowing if you're working alone or if you're working as a pair in a generally non-hierarchical manner, or if you've got an agent in a local authority, that determines a lot of the ways that we need to build some of the pieces in. So we've got our 4 local authority users. We've got John, who does it all for a local authority. He does everything, and he's a NaPTAN team of 1. He's doing it all. An example is Essex, which is managed by Lee. And then we've got some questions which we kind of put in, and I'm going to ask you to take 5 minutes while I go make a coffee, or we can all go make a coffee and take 5 minutes and just put in, when I've done this, put in any extra questions that you might have as a representative of that user. Then we've got Sindhu and Kim pairing on it. I know Sindhu and Kim no longer pair on it and no longer work on NaPTAN, but they became a very good pairing to describe everything to everybody on the team and how we thought about this. So they're both working on the NaPTAN processes for a local authority, and they're in a non-hierarchical team of 2. So in practice, this one might be called a manager, but they both tend to switch the roles between them. And this is important when we think about giving people permissions to upload and things like that, or alerts, as to knowing what's hierarchical and what's not hierarchical is really important. And Glasgow, Iona, you're one of the people that we put into this group as an example because of the way, when we've had conversations with you, the way that you and Elisa have talked about how you manage the data and things like that. Then we've got agents. We call it Andy, the mega agent. There's 2 broad types. There's Andy and Tansy. That's literally the 2 names, because between them, they look after nearly 60 ATCO codes now. And so they're looking at, almost over a third and less than a half of all of the ATCO codes in the country are looked after by 2 people acting on behalf of local authorities. And they do it in 2 slightly different ways. So Andy looks after the data process for many local authorities. They're in a commercial relationship, and for some they just host the software, for some they host the software and services, and for some they do the they host the software services and also help them manage the data. So they've got 3 layers of relationships just within that one person. Tansy looks after the NaPTAN data and processes for all the Welsh local authorities. They receive their updates via spreadsheets at irregular times, and their team then manages those across into the software and then publish them up to NaPTAN. So the relationships between the agent and the local authority from us, we don't generally have a direct relationship with the local authority. There are a couple of exceptions. Oxfordshire, for example, is a weird mixture of both John and Andy. So Oxfordshire is looked after by one person, Chris. Andy manages his software, but Chris looks after all of the data. So we've got a couple of, even splitting it into 4, there's 140 something of you. You're all incredibly different. We just wanted to have 4 broad types so that we could think about it.
Dr. J, I know this isn't all that relevant, but the SPT are more of an agent than the local authorities because we manage it on behalf of Glasgow and 10 other local authorities.
I will note that down. We are using.
Not that that's relevant to anyone else, really, but
no, it's really good because I'm trying to. I thought I had the right example in there because what I want to do is, the team uses this to go and check the data and make sure that we're doing things right and know who to test it with. So it's not so. Iona. And I'm also aware that my accent meets your name and always comes out slightly wrong because I pronounce it as if it's a Maori name. So my apologies.
That's
Working more as agents for 10 local authorities. I will find another example of a pairing one because we had a really good example. And then Di came, and I say, and then Di came back as if it's a bad thing. And then Di came back, so we no longer have that really good example one. I will find another, but thank you. But I love the fact that, even trying to separate local authorities into 4 types, it's almost impossible. And then we've got Gerard and team, which is talking about the larger local authorities that have entire teams working on them. Transport for London and Transport for Greater Manchester are basically the 2 big ones where they've got multiple people. There's people at the top. There's very hierarchical relationships within those teams. But what we believe is all of these local authority types have the same questions. Do I have the data that we need for accessibility? What if it takes a lot of extra effort to create it? And do I need to do an audit? So I'm going to put a little 5-minute timer on. I'm going to go off and make myself a coffee and go off screen. Please feel free to take a break and make a coffee. And when we come back, if you've got any thoughts of you need to answer these questions, how do we do it? That's perfect. Take your time and put those questions up and we'll go through and have a look at them. Sounds good?
Yep, sounds good.
Excellent. I'll see you all in 5 minutes. I'll stop sharing and that way I can easily find where to cut the video.
5 minutes later.
I am just waiting for people to say that they're back.
Sorry, I'm back.
I'm back.
Me too, sorry.
That's okay. I was sitting there going, I'm sure I said hi to everybody and we had the bing bong. So excellent. So we've got a couple of questions that I'll run through. I've got about 30 seconds before my timer goes off that my coffee is brewed. So this perhaps should be, does my authority have the data? That's a really good one. Thank you for that. How to record the information so it's accessible to external bodies. That's one of the things that with that constraint we're trying to take away because we're going to be doing some inferring and I'll talk about that in a moment. How can this data be kept up to date? Yeah, I know, have to think about that. What is the minimum expectation for a traveller? I'm just going to switch traveller to passenger if you don't mind. It's just a little less of a potentially ambiguous notation of it. So I'm taking that you're saying the minimum expectation for a passenger to see accessibility.
Yes. Yeah.
And can an indirect relationship work? How close to the actual location does somebody need to be? Yeah, unfortunately, this is one of those things. Andy has taken on some of the Scottish local authorities, and he is based in the southwest, and they are not. So this is a very much an interesting question. I think some of it's around who you're working with in terms of the local authority and what relationship as an agent are you handling their software, their data, helping them with their data management, or are you actually looking after the data? And those are three quite different pieces there. So what I'm going to do, when I get a customer complaint, who do I pass it on to and what recompense is possible? That's a really good one to put in there. So what I'm going to do is just quickly run through who we believe our accessibility data consumers are. So we've got 5 of them. So we've got Mike and Andy who run Travelline, because we all know Mike and Andy who run Travelline. Travelline and Mike and Amy are the product data managers of the Travelline and Plus Bus solutions built on NaPTAN data. They run websites for travel planning and purchasing tickets. An example is Travelline, which allow users to plan multimodal, multi-operator, multi-LA journeys via the website. These are the questions. We're meeting up with Mike and Amy to run through them and just ensure that we've answered all the questions. We also know that Plus Bus kind of ties into this, because if you're planning an accessible journey from one train station to another, and then you're offered a Plus Bus, but the Plus Bus doesn't give you that accessibility information, how is that going to help? So we need to talk with Julie, who's also involved with Travelline, having a look at the Plus Bus and what information that they need to be able to know about accessibility for Plus Bus when people are purchasing tickets. There's APIs. For example, Pete runs an API that combines NaPTAN data with other travel data for clients. An example of this is EtoWorld, who take in NaPTAN data and some other travel data and combine it off into Google, so that Google can consume it. And it's like answering questions like, what data would they get? How would I need to make changes to the data? Where is the schema for the data? Pete, who runs a GIS site, a geographical information site. David manages a software solution that combines NaPTAN data with geographical information for analysis by his clients. An example is Basemap. Again, it's what data could they get? How would they make changes to the data if needed? How do we show them the provenance of data? Where is the schema? And in fact, one of the things that I have as a little theory is the provenance might be better than the schema, but that's a whole kind of separate questions to ask people. And then we've got Demetrius runs a travel planning app, because I got to meet Demetrius and the team from CityMapper. And CityMapper is a travel planning app built on NaPTAN, TransExchange, and SiriRT data. But they are multi-operator, multimodal, but they tend to be within a local authority. So they'll do travel planning for London and travel planning for Manchester, but it's so you can plan in CityMapper to get from my house to either Euston or King's Cross to catch a train to Manchester. I can't remember. I think it's King's Cross. I can plan that part of the journey, and then via something else I can plan getting from King's Cross to Manchester, and then I can use CityMapper again when I change it to Manchester to plan my travel within Manchester from the Manchester station to where I need to go, but they can't do the bit in the middle. So it's kind of having them in there is talking about that multimodal, multi-operator, but within a single local authority. And then we've got some DFT users. So we've got Ava, who manages BODs. Do they need to include this data in BODs? Is this a feed that needs to go in? Is this a feed that people would use besides BODs? Because BODs doesn't do passenger level information. They do, a lot of it is a bit more for analysis around bus schedules and the feed of bus schedules that people then consume and put into their systems. do they need to have some of this information? Then we've got Andrew, who supports users. Sorry, just turning my timer off. Andrew, who manages our support requests, and it's like, how do I explain to a data producer what information they should be giving us? How do I explain what data we supply to data consumers? And can I explain the provenance? So these are probably some more communication questions. For our Cody team, Ron, who's part of Cody NaPTAN, it's how can he explain the provenance of any data? Can he explain how we make any inferences from the data? If we're using something to take data and then infer accessibility from this, can we clearly explain that in a way that the coders can understand? So if we need to tweak it, they can go and tweak those inferences. John manages policy for public transport, looking at legislation, policy, and what outcomes. It's like, what new policy implications come from having this data? Can I take this data and actually extrapolate it and understand what we should do it? And then we've also got the data analysis team of how we take this data, provide answers to the policy teams around policy and legislation, and look at where it goes. And for example, if we map the geographical information data for bus stops to economic markers for a locality and then put accessibility on top of that, what does that come up with? Does that come up with anything that's really interesting? And will that help drive some of the things that we need to do? So we're also going off to talk to all of these users and just to understand their view of the service before we start really building it. The as-is process, I've put it does not exist, despite the fact that the Olympic data exists from 2016. It's never been updated. There is no mechanism to update it, which is almost the same with the rail audit data. We need to understand what the mechanism is that they have in place to update that data and to keep it up to date. I need to write up the historical context and everything that's going on there. Our comms plan, honestly, we are starting the comms plan at least 8 weeks late, because normally I would have liked to have done something like this before we kicked off the discovery work, so that I got you all completely lined up and not at week 3 and week 4 of doing this work. We got all of the funding and the okay to do this very, very late last year, and we couldn't start any of this till everything was signed off, and it didn't get signed off until between Christmas and New Year, or just before Christmas. So we couldn't send anything out other than a very vague email that said, we're going to possibly be doing something on accessibility, because we didn't have confirmation of when we would be starting it. We started it on the 2nd of January. So the high-level service summary of where we are is that NaPTAN will publish a set of accessibility infrastructure at a stop level. This can be viewed through more than one accessibility lens, e.g. power wheelchair, manual wheelchair, blind. Future work is blank, because I just need to think about how that would look. And we've got some componentry. So this is kind of looking at the pieces we're building around NaPTAN and MPTG. We've got the little managed removal. Your data retention is also a little plugin, but I kept it simplified with just managed removal there. And so accessibility would be like managed removal, a little bit off to the side, but still linking across the two core pieces of data. And this is trying to draw it out, and this is very sketchy. So we've tried to indicate what is in control and what is not in our control, and what we need to know about to make the right pieces. So not in our control is the street furniture data, but it will inform how we best serve data to a journey planner. And then we've got John, who does it all, sending the accessibility data I have to DFT. I want to know what I could submit so I can indicate best what the solution is on the street for my local authority. So again, it's that focus of what's on the street is really important. How we describe it, we can do a little bit of work on. We've then got NaPTAN and the accessibility piece, and accessibility will ingest, I've drawn 3 types of data, there will probably be more. The Olympic data, inferred data, which would come from street furniture data, and audit data. And I've coloured them as 1, 2, 3, because what we might do is say, if we've got Olympic data for a stop, we know that it was created. We know how it was created. May or may not reflect the street. If we've got inferred data from the street furniture, we can be a lot more solid about what is there. And if we've got a full accessibility audit data like we do have for some of the rail stations, that would even overwrite some of the inferred data. So it's kind of like, how do we build this up and how do we indicate what type of data that we're able to provide for the stop? Is it our bronze Olympic data, or is it gold standard and audit data, or is it something in between that we've inferred from other data? So there's a lot of this is a wonderfully complex piece of work that the team is starting to pull apart with a lot of our technical spikes as to how they would do that. And then whatever happens, we will do some kind of linked up so that Mike and Amy, who run Travelline, can obtain data about accessibility infrastructure at a stop level so they can use this within their journey planner. This leads to a very interesting question that came from the journey planners. And it's not in our control, but it does inform some of how we would put this information out. And I think the answer is going to be different from each journey planner. Should I show only journeys with accessible infrastructure to a user? So if the user says I am in a wheelchair, do I only show journeys that are usable by them, that have that infrastructure? Or should I show the accessible infrastructure of a chosen journey to a user? And those are two quite different level questions as to how the journey planner plans a journey, how the information needs to be delivered to the journey planner, and how the information is consumed and played with. And talking with two journey planners already, though the answers to those are subtly different and significantly different for some of them. And it's like, okay, this is not in our control, but it is going to determine how the different ways that we present the data to journey planners. So we don't lock them into only one way of doing it. We allow them that room for innovation, but we're also aware that there are two very distinct ways of using the data, and that will put constraints and make features that we need to make available within the data to support these two different ways of doing things. I really do need my coffee, so excuse me for 2 seconds while I make my coffee, while I plunge my coffee and put it into a cup so I can drink it. Are there any questions so far while I quickly do that?
It's more sort of some thoughts on that whole how you present it. So I've been involved in some work on accessibility standards in Europe, and as part of that we did quite a lot of work with users or potential users, and I think your example, Dr. J, of some underground stations where there's 3 flights of stairs, where you would go, I'm not going to do that because I know I can't, is that's the challenge. Because if it was 1 flight of stairs, you might be able to do it, because if you've been there before, you know that they're not too steep, and it can be done quite quickly and easily. But if it's 3 flights, and getting that level of nuance into journey planners to come up with a definitive yay or nay is really, really difficult. There's so many subtleties that I think the conclusion certainly was that you need to present that information to help to allow people to make their own decision, because it might be somebody has a good day and they can do it today, but they can't do it tomorrow.
Absolutely, and that's why and based on that and the reading that I did around that, that's why back under the service we talk about having the agency, the information to have agency and autonomy over your journey. It's about having information and you being able to make those decisions autonomously or and if you need assistance, then it is still autonomous of you being able to say, yes, I will need assistance at the stop, and this is, and knowing the next steps that they need to take and things like that. I think that we're taking, I've taken a slightly different, or almost the reverse track to how you've been approaching it with the European standards, in that I'm trying to look at, we know bus stops are 97% of our data set currently. It should only be about 95, but hey, 97 is fine. If I can solve enough of the 97%, that's a lot more data than people have already. If I can just say, hey, these bus stops be okay, you can use these bus stops and you can get to this train station, that's kind of the complicated parts. That 3% is King's Cross St Pancras station, because that is a wonderfully complicated space, and I play within it, and I physically play within it myself a lot, and it's a wonderfully complicated space. All of the airports are also wonderfully complicated. So when you move away from buses, you end up with a lot of these extra complications, like the between platform transits on metros, especially in London, is a very complex piece. I'm trying to leave that complexity till a little bit later, till we've got and focusing on getting the bus information in for now. I know that means that there's a bit of a gap when it comes to some of the train stations and some of the metro stations, and there's some wonderful little nuances that we can start to put in. But by having a model that works for most, I think then we can start to iterate on it and look at how we bring in some of those extra layers of information for that final 3% of data, because we're also going to have really good relationships with those local authorities for that 3%. We've got a good relationship with TfL. They have some of that detailed level data. They have it from the ticket barrier to the street. They don't have it within the station so much. So it's kind of like, okay, let's look at, if you've got ticket barrier to the street, that's actually a really good set. And then we can start to expand it and iterate on it and look at how we can slowly bring in more information. I also know that Google are planning, or Google have put out that they're going to be doing some inter-platform transfer information within their city, within their viewee thing. They've got people with the street view things wandering around TfL, showing how you transfer between various stations. I also know, for example, City Mapper does really well of saying which part of the train you should sit on to be close by an exit and things like that. All of the shibboleths, all of those little nuances of information that your real Londoner knows, City Mapper has kind of surfaced as well. One of the other pieces that I'm really curious about, because it really impacts Elephant and Castle, is pathways between parts of the infrastructure that you can do in daylight that you should not do after dark, because of there's a shortcut through between a railway and a building that's got the wrong kind of cladding on, so it's now derelict. That's fine during the day, completely, it's well trafficked and everything. The moment it's after dark, do not travel down it, take the long way round. And it's that kind of stuff. How do we surface that? How do you surface your time of day? And this also impacts a little bit in some of the more rural bus stops of, this stop is perfectly accessible in daylight. However, there's no street lights. And so after dark, this bus stop might be less than preferable, and you might want to go one more on and find a way of coming back, or something, or have somebody meet you at the bus stop. So it's just kind of indicating if it's well lit or not well lit after dark. It might be one of the things that we put in. And this is the things here, which is not in our control as NaPTAN, but will inform how we present data and how we group data. So one of the things, I've got Brenda with a journey planner, and I've just got, these are literally, I took 2 minutes and planned out a journey with disability icons and stock blind icons, and there's such a wide variety. So it's like, one of the things that I believe that we should be doing is providing the information and guidance as in, this tests well, this doesn't test well, to journey planners. We shouldn't be providing, you have to show it like this, but we can say, this seems to test well, this doesn't test well, and allow that innovation to happen. And then that real world testing will help us really understand and iterate what is needed for people. TfL has some really good iterations on their journey planners. However, some of their journey planners are wonderfully wonky, and Leon and I had a fun session on one of these of trying to plan a journey from Old Kent Road Tesco's back to Elephant and Castle. And if you do it slightly wrong, if you put in certain pieces of information, it will plan you a 25-minute journey rather than telling you to cross the road and catch a bus that will take you 7 minutes. It gives you this long, convoluted 25-minute journey. And it's very, very much, how do we tell it that 25-minute journey is wrong? And you literally just need to tell the person to use the crossings to cross the road to catch the bus on the other side of the, whatever it is, the Old Kent Road there. And it's kind of one of those crazy things with journey planners of getting that right. And it all depended as to whether or not we tick step free. And if we tick step free, it suddenly wanted me to do this 25-minute 2-bus journey rather than cross the road in a 7-minute 1-bus journey, which was very interesting, and which links into showing accessible infrastructure of a journey and planning a journey that only matches specific infrastructure. And it was a little wonk inside their travel planning as to how it was reading that. So that's kind of where I've got to so far with planning things out, and our discovery will help us really understand this part here and make some really firm plans about what sort of data we bring in and how we bring it in, and how we expose it across here. And our technical alpha is helping us really understand how we take in some of this data. And one of the extra pieces that we're looking at is me working with the data team. And this is huge assumptions, and we're going to have to play around and figure this out. The Olympic data, for the most part, used the stop type to determine whether or not it was accessible. That's reading through the schema. That's kind of some of what they've done, and then they've done some removal of some stops in a few pieces. What I want to look at is if we use the stop type and the MPTG locality size. So, for example, we know that stops in central London are really good. Stops in central Cheshire are really good. Stops in the wilds of Cheshire, less good, less likely to be accessible. And can we use that MPTG data to inform if a marked stop is in this type of locality, then it's more likely to be accessible than a stop that's not in this type of locality. And just do some testing and look at, if we infer this, what's our confidence of inferring this, and can we therefore add to the Olympic data and get information for more stops? And does it allow us just to do true false, or should we do maybe potentially really not? Custom stops, we can just blanket say 99% probably not. For demand responsive transport, we can say, and your flexible stops, probably not. However, your buses are so small that if they're less than 22 people, they don't have to have they don't need to meet the accessible bus regulations. So there's little nuances to play around with them there, because we don't want people at an accessible stop expecting a bus that they then can't use because of that hitch. And so there's a lot of nuances to play around with that we want to get into, but I think just having some sense of what's physically at a bus stop is going to help us unpick that. I'm going to take a breath, and Tim, you're going to ask a question or make a comment?
Well, it was more the Olympic data, in inverted commas, outside of London was, after a lot of screaming by people, changed from do a survey and tell us which stops are accessible. It got flipped on its head to, we will assume all stops are accessible unless you tell us otherwise. And so some people actually spent time going, actually, that's on a single track road, that's probably not accessible. And some people knew that there was always cars parked outside of that stop because it was one they went past. So it really can't be relied upon. And I would advocate not doing that approach again.
Oh yeah, no, we do not. That's why where the Olympic data is just being used as the core seed to start this off, because we don't want to throw away data that we've already got, but we want to look at, okay, if it's so unreliable or so untrustworthy, but also could we make some assumptions and it work, or make some assumptions and it not work? And can we tell that from data that we can get hold of? And this is some wonderful data analysis that I'm going to throw to BB and maybe some of the data team. We've also got a couple of people who are training to be data engineers on the team, or training within data analysis, so we can get them to build the right sort of queries using Python to do a lot of querying of the data for us, and then we can have a look and head off to Google Street View and things like that and do some very quick checks of is this, if we mark the stop as accessible, would that be a sane thing to do? Hockeridge Ridge is my favorite example, and I'll do some, I'll quickly bring those up actually. Iona, continue to talk while I find us Hockeridge Ridge and the other ones.
Oh, well, just kind of reiterating what you're saying about things being a nuance, but like it was in my head because just this week somebody had written into us to say that they are visually impaired, and the stop that they use, which is in the city centre, doesn't have a shelter. And so their guide dog can't really identify it as a stop because it's just a pole in the middle of the road. There's no high access curb there, so it wouldn't be considered accessible for people in wheelchairs, for example. But by putting a shelter in there to this person, that would become more accessible. It turns out we actually can't do that because it's just too busy a footway and there's not enough room for a shelter. But it's just thinking about what is accessible to different people. And like that's something we don't always think of as a shelter, as like a convenience, and particularly good for elderly and shelter, but not, you don't think of it so much as being an important thing for visually impaired people. I don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think I didn't know that, but the moment you said it, I'm like, of course, yes, that's how a guide dog would identify what is a bus stop and what is not a bus stop in many ways. And I think those are nuances that we want to go out and uncover. And I think having those examples, and everyone says all of this is anecdotal, and I'm like, anecdotal is a lot in this, because we've got an ecosystem of around 200 people who put in and consume this data. Millions of people are affected by it, but 200 people. So anyone bringing in an anecdote means it's going to happen for more than 5% of that audience. It's got, or more than 2% of that audience. It's going to be happening for some of it, and we need to start really listening to those anecdotes and thinking about what they mean. On screen, I've got the lovely Hockeridge Wood, which is a marked stop, wonderfully inaccessible to pretty much everybody. I have tried to take photos at this stop. It's actually, there's a little driveway that I park up there and walk back. The traffic is travelling at 60 miles an hour because it's an A road. And it is one of the most frightening times that I've had. My team were like, we cannot believe that you went out and risked yourself just to get a photo of a bus stop. You are completely obsessed. But this is one of the ones of, there's no street lighting, there's no foot paving, but they are marked. So all of these things. So these are ones that would show up as marked, but they're also between localities. They're between villages, so there's little nuances that we want to start playing around with. Can we pull out the Hockeridge Woods? Can we pull out those ones that are just not accessible? Alison, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and if you've got an example from Kent, I will quickly throw it in.
I'm sorry. I'm Surrey County Council.
Sorry.
Roger from Kent is does our NaPTAN. That's why I mentioned him. And we
welcome
have
to
many.
welcome to Jay has no knowledge of this country whatsoever as to how it fits together.
Don't worry, we're all down south. We've got many and several, like you're showing there, that's for sure. Particularly, I think if you find walkers use them because they're walking so far and then they get on buses, and it could be rural buses. I can't remember any that we've got on a 60-mile-an-hour road, but probably have got them. But then all our roads are going to be reduced in speed anyway. What I was going to say was, just it occurred to me when we're saying something's accessible, we think it's accessible. If we went out and did an accessibility audit, and then we have something like a borough council that comes and puts a bin in the way, and out of however many bus stops we've got, which we don't know either, about 6,500. Things happen. And one other thing, just when you mentioned street lighting, I had a very interesting discussion with my niece who's 27 about whether a bus shelter should be lit or not, because I think it should be. But actually, she said if she was in a rural area, she wouldn't necessarily want someone knowing that she was sitting at a bus shelter and waiting. So back to the assumption that Iona had about a shelter being a spot that a guide dog could find, I would think street lighting should be what we would want, and I would feel safer. But others have a different idea, and we have this debate quite a lot at work. We haven't solved it, and I just haven't put in lighting at the moment, but we're still thinking about it. So just a couple of, as you said, assumptions that we make. But that's why it's useful to talk amongst ourselves, and we can think of all the different vagaries we've got.
And I think again, you've brought up a really good one. I'm just going to jump to Cricketwood. Yes, I found the right one. So there's 2 stops here on the North Orbital Road. How do I know this? Because I used to drive up to Chesham a lot. During lockdown, I was bubbling with somebody who lived up there. So this is kind of a really good bus stop. It's pretty well lit. There's lighting from the central reservations. It's pretty well populated. When you turn around, you see that to get over the road, there's a footbridge that's not step free, but is kind of ramped so that if you're dragging a trolley or a suitcase or something or a pushchair, you can go over it, but you might not want to go over it in a wheelchair. However, the next stop up, just bear with me here 2 minutes when I do this. We just need to run up the road. It's 50 miles an hour, uncontrolled traffic. Everyone's running between the M25 and the M1. This is what it's like. There's a bus stop just up here. There is another bus stop. It appears to have 2 flags. It doesn't. It's only got one. That's just a Google Street Maps ghost. And it's got a slightly more rickety shelter, but it's kind of a little bit more accessible. But to get from this bus stop across the road, you need to walk up to here where there's a little footpath. You then run across the road into the central reservation. And now I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to close this and zoom out and put the layers on top so you can see it, and zoom in. So you need to cross the central reservation, head down, cross another 2 lanes of uncontrolled 50-mile-an-hour traffic, and then you end up in this reservation where you've got a 30-mile-an-hour this way but you need to cross it at the top end to hit a pathway. Or if you want to go this way, you've got to cross it across 2 30-mile-an-hour weirdness to get to the next way to continue your journey. I really, really want to know how many people use this bus stop and how many people have survived that crossing. Because it feels like this should be on crash data, being like, oh my God, why is there a bus stop there that is so dangerous? But also, how do people use this? Because it just feels almost unusable. And Alison, I'm sure you've got similar based down in Surrey.
We have, and I struggle with. We do get a lot of comments. Well, for those that can use it, they can use it. At least it's there, and it's one of those. It's always been there, and the people that know they can use it, and the people that don't. That's not quite an answer when you're trying to describe accessibility, and that's when I start hitting my head against a brick wall, really. Yes, I'm sure we all have in all our authorities the vagaries of such, and yes, bus operators are still serving them as well. So
Yeah.
so they're pulling out into a 50 mile an hour double
Yep.
lane.
Yep. They do, and it's frightening.
But the other counter argument on that is that it's providing a service where people can use a bus, so which is a bit of a struggle.
Yeah.
So otherwise we take it away.
Yeah, and it is one of those things, and I completely understand both arguments, and I'm not making either argument. It's very much these two bus stops have on paper they would have very similar levels of accessibility. In reality, I know which bus stop I would use, but how would we describe that to somebody in such a way that they made the decision to maybe come in at this bus stop and walk there and walk north, rather than do the insanity bus stop and walk south to get to the train station, which is all the way over here. So it's kind of one of those interesting little pieces that I pulled out of going, oh, this is actually quite an interesting, because all of these anecdotes and anecdotal problems are actually examples of real world, examples of street problems that we need to figure out how to describe them to somebody and how to tell them about it. And the last one I'll do is I'll just do Newington Causeway. Here we are, the bottom. This is basically my manor where I live, and pretty much every single bus stop is accessible. However, my train station and my tube station are not. There is no step-free access down. They're both at least one flight of stairs, if not more. But if I go just slightly north and go on at Borough, if I'm going north on the Northern Line, it's step-free. But if I need to go south on the Northern Line, it is not. So it's kind of one of those interesting little tweaks of when I used to use the Northern Line for work, I would walk up to Borough, which is a slightly longer walk for me. It's another 5 minutes, but it's a much, much easier station physically for me to use and if I need full-on step-free access to something, I can go all the way up to London Bridge. I can either catch a bus or walk just that little bit of extra distance to London Bridge, which is a fully accessible station that serves most of the same things that Elephant and Castle does. And it's kind of one of those little weirdnesses of the area of, as a disabled passenger or as a disabled person, the accessibility, you gain that local knowledge of the accessibility of your local stations from talking with people, from trying it out, from getting stuck on a platform, all of those things. Some days my legs don't work. Some days it'll take me 3 minutes or 5 minutes to climb that one flight of stairs because I've just my leg is just refusing to play the game. And it's like, okay, if I'm feeling like that, I need to hop off here and travel this way round to do it. And you just become more knowledgeable about public transport than other passengers who are doing the same journey. And it becomes, and how do we take some of that knowledge out of people's heads and surface it so other people can make use of it? And that's a lot of what I'm trying to think about as well. How do we take the information that anyone who lives in this area knows the accessibility of those 3 stations, knows their relative distances, knows how they're going to feel that day and how they can move around between it? And how do we get some of that information in a way that people can describe it? So that is the joy of accessibility. And it's going to be, I think it's an interesting challenge to take on. We are in the next meeting, we're going to talk about data quality. In the March meeting, we'll talk about where we got to with this. We can show you the proof of concept. We can show you the findings from the discovery, what sort of data landscape we've got. If any of you would like to be involved in this work, get in touch. Use the central contact email, not just my email. I've got some time off coming up, and we just want to make sure that the team always has access to that information. So, Alison, if you're if you're happy, I'll pass your details on to our discovery peeps and get them involved. BB, I'll soon add your name as the product owner there. I'm the service designer, and there is a central contact email. If you're chasing up any issues with the central 900 stops, please use the central contact email and not my personal one, because it means that more than just me sees it. And if only I see it, sometimes it falls into it's in the pile of flagged emails for my attention that I never seem to get a chance to get to. But that would be really really good. And hopefully that's everything. Is there? Thank you for putting your feedback up. I really appreciate that, and also thank you for your time, your attention, and your input. It makes these things really worthwhile doing, and I think we get a lot. DFT gets a lot out of them, especially in how we can pull this together and make this kind of work. And I will turn off recording, and then you can